Okay, homework quiz number 7. Okay, that's the right one. So, okay, so consider this the price ceiling. What's the reduction in trade caused by the price ceiling? Okay, so I don't know if so. What was your question about this one? You know the reduction in trade is going from 12.5 units at the equilibrium, right? And then you can see there's the price ceiling where you can see them, all of the labels pop up together, and it goes to 1/2 unit. So here there's a reduction of 12, right?
So that reduction is just the distance from the equilibrium to the price ceiling.
Yeah, quantity, yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense. I think it's, well, I think I overthought that one then.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, I mean that should make sense that absent the price ceiling, they would be trading the equilibrium quantity, right?
Yeah.
And then because there's a price ceiling, they only end up trading 1/2 unit. So the reduction is from, in this case, it's pretty easy, from 12.5 to 1/2. That's a reduction of 12. And if I submit that again, I get this, and I should be able to verify 12.
All right, so yeah, that helps. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think I did the exact same thing that Noah did. I think I solved for both of the things and then subtracted them.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that you guys can, but you know, the Thursday 11 o'clock meeting, somebody asked that exact same question, and we went through it. I don't normally record those because they're more office hours stuff, but you guys can come and ask questions on Thursday if you want. So I know that maybe the smart thing to do is to go ahead and, like, between now and, you know, Thursday morning, like, look over the problems on the quiz that you, and you know, so if we look at this week's, because this is what I want to transfer to is what we're doing now. So we're on 11, welfare and taxes, and you can see, I don't know that they're the same in order. 5, I don't think they are. But then if we go to the quiz for this week, you see we have our 10 questions, right? And so you could go back and forth and say, okay, well, from these practice questions here, it's, I don't know which questions it's going to be. It's like questions 2 and 4 and whatever, like 5 of them are represented and 5 of them aren't. So you could look at, you know, the questions that weren't represented and say, oh, this one seems really hard, right? And so I'd like to stop by on Thursday and chat with, you know, Dr. Hunter for 10 minutes about it, or 5 minutes about it, just to make sure I'm on the right page. And I'm here to help. So, I mean, that might be a strategy. I don't know how strapped you guys are for time on Thursday, but it's an idea anyway. And so, and anyway, did you guys have more questions, or you just want to go get started on the stuff for this week? No more questions? Okay. Hearing no questions, let's go ahead and get started. Okay. So this is the practice. Maybe it's better. Let's see if we can. So yeah, 1 and 1 match up. So it says So we've got a demand and a supply equation, and there's a tax that's levied on the seller. And so you can see the tax that's levied on the seller there. Can you see that, Noah?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. So it's just shifting the supply curve. In this case, you know, I told you all before that it's a really good habit to think of supply and demand curves as shifting left and right, because there's symmetry in that. An increase in supply is a shift to the right, an increase in demand is a shift to the right, a decrease in supply and a decrease in demand are both shifts to the left. But I did, when I first mentioned that, I said, there is one exception, or maybe there are a few exceptions, but this is one of them. And in this case, and I don't know if you can see this, Noah, but it looks like the supply curve is shifting up, right?
Yes.
And when we're talking about taxes, that's the best way to think about it. And you can see here the tax is 10, right? And so we go from at the intercept of the supply curve, or what we called like the supplier's choke price, you know, where his quantity supply drops to 0. It goes from 25 to 35. So you can clearly see the tax there. And I'll tell you one other thing. There are a lot of different ways to think about taxes, but sort of the clearest mental picture is to think of the tax as being a cost of doing business. Because you'll remember, and you know, we'll have a chance to emphasize this a little bit later, but it's been said in the lectures, and I don't know if you remember, but basically the supply curve is the seller's costs of production. You know, the reason why this seller won't sell anything for less than $25 a unit is because that's what it's costing him to make that first unit is $25. And if you look later, this is a very, very shallow supply curve. But if we get to like the 8th unit, the cost of that 8th unit in terms of materials and labor and other stuff like that is $33 a unit. Okay. So if he also has to pay a tax, then he has to add to his costs, basically the cost that the government is imposing on him of an extra $10, right? So the minimum price he can charge to recover all of his costs, like for the 8th unit here, right? It costs him $33 in labor and materials and another $10 in taxes. So if he doesn't get at least $43, can you see what I'm pointing out, Noah?
Yeah, again.
If he doesn't get at least $43 for that 8th unit, then he's going to lose money. And you know, businesses are in business to make profit, so they're not going to do something intentionally that's going to cause them to lose money on any deal. So that's the principle of how we model business behavior in economics, is we say that businesses are there to maximize profits. And so, yeah, they're not going to do anything for a loss. So it says here, it says, consider the shift caused by a tax that's levied on the seller, illustrated below. How much a surplus do consumers receive after the tax? So this is actually a pretty easy problem, and it is just like our problems where we talked about you know, there being a shift in demand and supply. So the tax basically just shifts the supply curve, and we can get rid of the old supply curve. We don't need it for this because it's saying how much, right, do the consumers receive after the tax. So they have this new after tax equilibrium, and you see how I just dropped that supply curve off of the graph. And so now we just have to look at consumer surplus, and we know consumer surplus is this triangle, right? And And it's for all consumers, not just one consumer. So we don't have to worry about the distance. We're measuring an area here. And can you see the area of the triangle? It's the top of the peak of the triangle. On the vertical axis, it's at $94. And then do you have a calculator with you? You want to walk through this one with me?
So 94 minus 42.38.
Yeah, that's the height of the triangle.
Okay.
And the base of it is 7.38 units.
Okay, divided by.
And,
So
and
it's 190.47.
okay, 190.47. I'm assuming you put everything in your calculator right away. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab this one and go over here, and I'll just put a 0 in there to get a calculator button. Yeah, there you go. So in this case, I think Ignithium would probably score it correctly. I don't know why there's a little bit of rounding error, but it seems pretty close. So I'm guessing we would get that one right. So let's see if we can go ahead and work on the next one. So this is so the second question, and is it also the second question here? How much surplus do producers receive after the tax? So yeah, we're exactly the same. Oh, no, let's see. This one is about the tax revenue generated. Let's see. Oh, that's 5. Yeah, so that one is on the quiz, but it's not represented here. But I think that you're in pretty good shape, right? Because even though it's not represented, we can go ahead and do it. This is the second one on the quiz, and it's not on the homework, but we would do the same thing, right? So we see the shift, and then we go there, right? And now we're looking at the producer surplus. And let me see, sometimes it's a little bit hard to find the equilibrium because these are clustered together pretty closely. Let's see. What's the best way to do this one? I'm searching around for it.
Equilibrium's on the red one, on the red and blue.
Well, you know, so for us, the after-tax equilibrium should be where these two lines cross.
Like on that one, I would just refresh, right?
Yeah, just because it's like it's kind of hard to see. So let's do a refresh and see if we can get a better one. Okay, so yeah, this one's clearly better, right? We can see there that they cross. Okay. Yeah, anyway, that should work. So get rid of this. Now the producer surplus, and who was I talking to that time? Was it, who suggested we refresh?
Oh, Brian.
Brian, okay, so Brian, you can do this one with me. So you can see the producer surplus there, right? It's going to be this lower, so, well, it's going to be this lower triangle, right? So the bottom of the triangle is going to be at 38. You have your calculator with you?
Yeah.
So we're going to be 5511 minus 38. That's going to be the height of the triangle there. And then the base is going to be 8.56 units, right?
Yeah.
And then times a half. What do you get for your answer?
It's going to be 73.23.
73.23. Submit. Yeah. So 73.23. Do you guys want to see if it scored it correctly? Let's see. I'll go under my grades. And then I'll go to 11. Yeah. And so you can see I got one correct. And this is one correct. Okay. So that was close enough. We didn't have to worry about a routing error issue. So we were good. All right. So let's see this next one. So now we get to something that's a little bit different, and you'd really have to take a good look at our lecture that has to do with the issue of not just the after-tax quantity traded. Actually, the one I wanted to talk about is the seller's after-tax price. Okay. The after-tax quantity traded is going to be easy because it's just going to be that after-tax equilibrium, right, Brian? So we're going to be able to see there pretty clearly that the after-tax quantity is going to be 15.4 units. So that should work out well for us. Okay, so we're good. So number 4, the tax revenue generated. So this one I think is a little bit more complicated because, and again, you guys could look at the lecture, but I'm gonna go ahead and do a new share, and I'll show you guys a whiteboard. And this is the way that you wanna think about the illustration. And I will use the same colors that we're using on the program so you guys can see what I'm doing. Okay. So there's demand. And here's the original supply curve, right? And here's the shifted supply curve. So the supply curve plus the tax, right? And then I'm going to put the tax as an arrow here, shifting the supply curve up. But I'm also going to illustrate it here. See, I have the after-tax equilibrium, and I'm dropping a vertical line down, and that's the same distance as the tax, right? And we know that the after-tax quantity of the good, that's how many units of the good are traded with the tax, is in line with that. Can you see what I'm talking about, Brian?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. So what I would do at this point is go ahead and dump this line because we don't really need it for anything in particular. And it's kind of a little bit hard to think about this because of the way that we solve the other problem. But because the slopes of the supply and demand curves haven't changed, all of the distances and areas are going to be the same as what I'm going to illustrate for you right now. And that is okay, this is the buyer's after-tax price. This is the seller's after-tax price. Remember, this distance here, oh, well, I'm gonna do it the other way. Let me do it as a black arrow. This distance here is the amount of the tax, right? So this orange rectangle, it's the amount of the tax multiplied by the number of units sold with the tax. So this ends up being the tax revenue generated that goes to the government. Okay. And this area up here, I want to do it in a different color. Is the consumer surplus after the tax. And this area here is the producer surplus after the tax. And this area, what should I do it in? I guess I'll do it in purple. This triangle here is what we call the deadweight loss. Okay. And those are all the things that, and I'll put a little key over here. That we're going to be asked. Okay. So I'll put that as deadweight loss. And this is tax revenue. And this is PS after tax. And this is the consumer surplus after tax. Okay, and maybe it's a little bit helpful if I go like this, see if it'll. Okay, so you guys get it, right? Do you have any questions about this graph?
No.
No. Okay, so now if we go back to Ignithium, right? And we say how much tax revenue is generated. Can you see there is a little, the line, we call that the tax wedge. And there is no counterpart on the red line, right? We just have to imagine we're going to drop down our tax wedge or our tax distance to the red line and form a rectangle. But we know that that distance is 8. So our rectangle is going to have a height of 8, and it's going to be multiplied by the number of units traded after the tax, which is 13.5. So what's 8 times 13.5? That's our area for our tax revenue.
$108.
108. There you go. Who answered it?
Brian.
Okay, Brian, good job. Good job. Okay. Now here, seller's after tax price. Well, again, based on our illustration, you guys should be able to pick that one out. Anybody have any questions? No. Now the buyer's after tax price is a little bit tricky because again, well, here it's all kind of clustered together. You can't necessarily really see it. So maybe we get another example. Reload that. Let's see if we can get a better 6. Maybe this one's a little bit better, yeah. But see, there's no corresponding price on the original supply curve, right? But if we go back to our illustration, right, then we can see pretty clearly, oh, the difference is that the seller's after-tax price is just PV is equal to PB minus the amount of the tax, right? So if we know PB, the buyer's price, we can just calculate it by subtracting off the amount of the tax to get a seller's price. Do you see what I mean? Anybody have a question about that? Okay, I'm assuming there are no questions. You all are good. Okay. So we have buyer after tax price, which is the top there. And then what price did the buyer pay after the tax? That's still the buyer's after tax price. And then we get the seller's after tax price. And that was what I was just talking about. We got to take the buyer's after tax price and subtract off. And then the only difference here is that we're doing the same thing, right, on 9. But this is a tax that's levied on the buyer. So instead of shifting the supply curve up, we can illustrate that by shifting the demand curve down. And it's shifted down by the amount of the tax. So that's an equivalent way to represent the tax. Okay. And then this one, we have our little deadweight loss triangle there. But again, the base of the triangle is going to be the amount of the tax. So in this case, it's still a tax of 8. So it would just be that little triangle there. So that's all the questions. Is there any in particular that we went over that you guys would like to see again or in more detail, or is everybody pretty good?
Can we go over the buyer after tax price again? I think it was
Okay.
like 6.
Yeah. So I actually spent time on talking about the seller's after tax price. The buyer's after tax price is easy because it's just the top here where the shifted supply curve crosses the demand curve. So the buyer's after tax price in this case, do you see where they're crossing?
Yes.
So it says $45.67.
That would be your answer?
Well, yeah, because I mean, you can see based on our illustration, right? The PB there stands for the buyer's price, right? And that's where we had, and I can put it back in. I just took it out because it's kind of a distraction to have it in there, but this is the shifted supply curve. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
Right, okay. So is there anything else that you all needed help with on this particular assignment or no? Okay.
Wait, so then what is the seller's after tax price?
Well, remember, you take whatever price the buyer pays and then you subtract off the tax, and that's what the seller receives. So like, you know how when you go to Target, you pay sales tax, right? If you buy, because sales tax is about 10%. I know it's a little bit less than that, but if you buy something that's $10, I don't know about if you do this or not, but I always just, guesstimate that whatever I'm gonna buy, I add 10% to it, and that's gonna be the amount of money I gotta take to the store with me or plan on coming out of my checking account, right? So I remember because it was not this holiday season, but the one before that my daughter asked for a new PS4, and I said, well, you know, that's going to be $400, and I don't know, you know, with the other gifts and stuff, like if I want to spend $400 on that, but it's actually in my mind, right? How much do I think I'm going to have to pay when I go? Because that's what they were selling for. They were selling for $399 at Best Buy. I'm gonna have to pay $440, right? I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna put the PS4 on the counter, and it's gonna ring up at $399. They're gonna charge me 10% tax. That's another $40. So I'm gonna be out like $440. So that's my price. That's actually the amount of money I pay, right? So that $399, that's the amount after the tax that's going to Best Buy, right? So whatever the buyer's price is, you subtract off the tax, and that's what the seller receives. That's the seller's price. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. It does make sense.
Yeah. I as the buyer, I'm paying $440, and that price that Best Buy is listing of $400 for the PS, that's actually the amount of money they want.
So the seller's
Right.
after tax price in this situation would be $400.
Yeah, because that's how much Best Buy is going to get of the $440 that I'm out of pocket as the buyer, right?
Okay.
So it's not my price that they're listing. You know, they're listing their price, what they want, and then they just add the tax, and that's what my out of pocket is. That's what we mean by price. It's like, what do you really have to pay, right? The buyer, I got to pay $440. What's the seller's price? Well, that's what they actually receive. What's they get to put in their pocket, and they only get to put $400 in it. The rest of it goes to the government. So
Okay. So buyer
go ahead,
price-
Beverly.
So the buyer's price is the buyer's price after tax is $440, right?
Well, no, that's actually including the tax, right? Because
Yes.
yeah, they pay $440, but yeah, you could call that their after tax price. It's just you have to, in your mind, meaning what we mean by before and after is the before in our case is when there is no tax at all, you know, like a tax free. I don't know if you guys have ever been to any states that charge no sales tax or something like that, but it's kind of a trip.
Yeah, it's tax free.
Yeah. So
been-
then you actually pay whatever the price is that's marked. But in our case, so we'd be comparing before taxes, before there's any tax at all, and then after taxes when there is a tax in the system. And so yeah, Beverly, in that case, it's $440 is the after tax price for the buyer, and $400 is the after tax price for the seller. So
Okay.
yeah, but the language is a little bit funny because it's like,
Yeah.
but that's what we mean. Okay. Any other questions on this stuff, or y'all pretty good?
So if you tax the buyer, the same principle kind of applies.
Yeah.
Differently.
Yeah. So the thing is, and I go over this in detail in the online videos, but the proper language is what we call a tax levy. It's a legal concept, and what the government does is they'll levy a tax on one of the parties in the transaction, either the buyer or the seller. Most of the time, the tax is levied on the seller. So what that means is when the transaction takes place, the seller is legally responsible for collecting the tax. So they're acting as a tax collector on the government's behalf. You see, it's an administrative requirement. You are legally obligated. So when you go to Best Buy and you pay sales tax on the PS, right? Actually, the tax is being levied on Best Buy, and they're just itemizing it on your receipt. So you know, oh, okay, this amount's going to the government. But you can't walk up to the counter and say, hey guys, don't worry about it. I know there's 10% tax on this, and I'll go home and write a check to the government. I'm going to buy it. I'm just going to give you $400 because the government says that Best Buy is legally obligated to collect the tax at the time of the transaction. And then Best Buy is responsible for turning over that tax money to the government. Now, you can have a tax, and most taxes that you're familiar with and that I'm familiar with, most taxes are levied on sellers. And that's just because administratively for the government, it's easier because there are fewer sellers than buyers, right? Imagine if everybody was buying stuff all the time and having to keep track of it and send the government checks. It would, if that was happening all the time, it would just be chaos, right? But
Yeah.
since there's only like Best Buy, Walmart, Target, that's like 3 entities, you know, maybe GameStop, you know, that you would buy a PS4 from, it's a lot easier for the government to say, oh no, okay, Target, Best Buy, you collect all the taxes and then you write us one check. You might have 100 or 200 or 300 customers, thousands of customers even, but you collect all that tax and you send it to us. And the way it works in the state of California is there's something called the Franchise Tax Board. And whenever you open a business, you're responsible for once every 3 months or once every quarter, filling out a form of all of the sales from your business and then writing a check for all that tax that you collected from those sales. But an example of a buyer levy tax, you might also be familiar with if you've ever purchased a used car. So when you purchase a used car, you're supposed to pay. I mean, it doesn't always work out this way because normally, you know, people play games when they're selling and buying used cars. But the way it's supposed to work, if you do everything legally, right? If somebody has their car listed for like $3,000 on, you know, OfferUp or I don't know, Craigslist or something, you're supposed to go to them and pay them the $3,000 and get like a little receipt or bill of sale from them. And then you as the buyer are supposed to go home and write a check to the government for the taxes that are due on that $3,000 exchange. And so if you've ever filled out the forms for the DMV and stuff like that, you're supposed to, as the buyer, actually pay the tax, and the seller isn't supposed to pay the tax. But in that case, it makes sense, right? Because it's a used car and private parties, and you know, there's no efficiency gain unless there's, you know, somebody out there that's privately selling a bunch of used cars, right? It's you know, just a bunch of individuals. So hopefully that makes sense. But you can have a buyer levy or a seller levy, and that's a purely administrative requirement. Okay. Anyway, are there any more questions on that, or are you guys good? Okay. All right. Well, so I will go ahead.
Can we do the deadweight loss?
Yeah, sure. So here, remember, so the size of the tax is 8, right? And if we go back to our illustration on the whiteboard, then we can see this triangle. And so the base here, can you see what I'm pointing to here, Beverly? that base is
Yes.
going to be the amount of the tax. It's going to be 8. And then they call it the altitude of the triangle. I don't know if you're familiar with that term or not, but the altitude of the triangle in this case is going to be the distance between this vertex and the base. It's that distance right there. And maybe it's better if I draw it as a double arrow. It's this distance right here. That's the altitude of the triangle. Do you see, Beverly?
Yes.
And so if we look carefully, right, that altitude is the difference between, this is our original equilibrium quantity here, right? That distance is the difference between the equilibrium quantity and the after-tax quantity. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
So we've got to do Q star minus QT times the base times 1/2. That would be our formula. So let me go ahead and I can just write it here. So deadweight loss is equal to Q star minus QT times, and I'm put as H is like the height, times 0.5. Okay, do you have your calculator ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's take a look here. So in our case, we know that base is 8 and our after-tax quantity is 8.25 and our before-tax quantity is 9.25. So we're really lucky, right? So it's 9.25 minus 8.25, which is just 1. And it's going to be 1 times 8 times 1/2, which is just going to be 4, right? So we don't even need our calculator. Do you see what I mean? Do you follow the calculation?
Yes.
So let's do it. Ta-da!
That, that was simple.
Yeah, well, they are. What takes, I think, some time to recognize is just, and this is why I said that, you know, like my strategy for doing, let's say, well in this course is like, first you study like the basic diagram from your book or your lecture of what all these things are and what they look like. And then, you know, like have that next to you on a piece of paper in your notes or the book open or something. And then go to the Ignithium problem and look at it carefully and say like, okay, you know, even if you wanted to, I suppose you could like print it out and put it right next to it and say like, okay, you know, where are the areas that we're talking about, you know, and you know, are they triangles or rectangles, and where would I get all the distances and stuff like that? Do you know what I mean? You're just pulling information off of the Ignithium graph, and you know, then using your formulas for areas of triangles and rectangles and things like that. But if you just try to look at the Ignithium graph and you have no idea of what you're looking for, right? Am I looking for a triangle here? Am I looking for a rectangle there? Like, what am I looking for? Then it can, I think it can be really too much to do. That's my personal opinion, but I don't know, what technique do you use, Beverly, when you're doing this stuff?
I did the same thing, but I don't know. I wasn't getting the right I wasn't getting the right answers.
Okay. Well,
Follow the same computations, the formulas.
right. Well, at least on the practice ones, you can practice them a whole bunch of times until you get it right.
Yeah.
And you know, the if we look here on the practices, like I try to take a representative sample. So like here, this one's tax revenue. So they're like a little bit different. You know, we did consumer surplus. So, but producer surplus isn't there. Here's the buyer's after tax price, and the deadweight loss. So those are like different, you know. So if you can do all of those 5 on the practice, then you should have at that point in time been able to identify the areas so that you know, your formulas are right. How I'm calculating the triangle area right, I'm calculating the rectangle area right. But anyway, that's the way I try to you know, choose to practice problems, is to give you a chance to do that. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and